How we are planning the session with readings by both the authors, so you get a sense of what they write, how they write. A number of you would have read their works, but some of you may not have. So I think we'll start with Ruth. She is going to read a passage from Tigers in the Wild. Oh, she's going to read a passage from a book called Where the Serpent Lives. And will you like to talk a little bit about it before you start reading?
Yes, good morning. It's lovely to see you all on this sunny Sunday morning and to be in the presence of these two amazing women, both of them trained in forest management, which I am not, and they have their own stories, which I'm looking forward to hearing. I wrote the book about tigers more than 20 years ago now, at a time when tigers were more endangered than they are now. There were much fewer tigers in India than there are now. But after that, I wrote a novel about with heroes who are king cobra specialists, herpetologists in the wild. And so this is the beginning. This hero is called Richard. It's complicated for him because he is British and he's a British scientist working in an Indian forest. So the relations with wild animals are one thing, but the relations with people are much more complicated. But he is trying to measure the humidity and temperature of the eggs of a king cobra. She has left the nest temporarily in order to have a drink of water. The eggs were soft, like tennis balls. There were no leeches, but a few mites. But the mother had looked all right, shiny, not anemic. 90%. Brilliant. Well done, young mum. Now, hurry home. Then he heard a rustle. Oh, God, was she back already? No, that was just a tree shrew staring from a branch, but it was definitely time to go. He began slowly to straighten, but above him came a low, roary growl. And he froze. He was one of the few people in the world who knew what that growl was. King cobras do not hiss like other snakes. They expel air through holes in their trachea. Now he saw the hood towering above him. Her golden throat, black-edged, was 2 feet from his nose. She must have been rearing up to see over the bushes, and he'd alarmed her by standing up himself. In that electric moment, when human meets king cobra eye to eye, each is liable to confuse the other's motive. Keep still, he thought, be very still. He knew the biology all too well. She could force into his tissues 0.7 milliliters of citron-tinged venom, enough to kill 1 elephant or 20 people. Running was hopeless. He would still be in her range 6 feet away, and she could charge amazingly fast. No eye contact. Let her gaze. She would do what she decided. The forest was utterly still, but for the thud of his still healthy heart. The leech wriggling over his shoe might be surprised in a minute by what was happening to the blood it was so keen to reach. Every snake venom is a unique cocktail of enzymes, polypeptides, and glycoproteins. I love all those words. Glycoproteins, I'll say it again, which act on different systems of the body, nerves, breath, muscles, and blood. Neurotoxin, the main component in cobra venom, would bind instantly to receptors on the surface of his muscle cells, block communication between his nerves and his muscles, severing the impulse that made his muscles contract. Meanwhile, tissue around the bite would swell and necrotize. Hemorrhagin would crumble his capillaries, and his own blood would treacherously circulate to the rest of his body, the proteins causing all this havoc. The park did not stock king cobra antivenom, which was only made in Thailand. Anyway, he would never reach the guard post. Within minutes, those neurotoxins would stun his nervous system and slow his breathing. Paralysis would follow, as the textbook said, very fast. Looking down at his feet, like a boy confessing to a broken rule, he stood immobile for what seemed a very long time. He concentrated, as only a scientist or a poet can, on precise names for the leaves he was looking at. He felt her eyes upon him. He was in the hands of the living God, of neurosynapses in a reptile brain. When he looked up, she was gone.
That was lovely. Neha,
Over
would
to
you
you.
like to read something from your book before we begin our conversation?
That was so beautiful, Ruth. I have goosebumps. So I'm reading from Wild and Wilful, which tells you the story of 15 wild animals in India. And this is the story of Ganga, who is a mother elephant in a herd in West Bengal. In a particular tea estate called Gangaram in the south of Siliguri, in the state of West Bengal, a herd of elephants arrived. In that herd, Avijan noticed a mother and her calf. As the years passed, he found the herd repeatedly in Gangaram tea estate. There was no food there to be found, but it formed part of their route for their relentless search for food. Avijan decided then that the female was his favorite. He memorized her face. He named her Ganga after the tea estate. He noticed she had a tumor above her left ear, one that would now be an identifying marker. He watched Ganga elephant as she took care of her young calf. He realized then that she was also taking care of the other calves in the herd of 13 elephants. His notes, his field notes from the lives of the elephants reveal their deep intimacies with each other. Ganga was an affectionate mother, but she was also a mother for all. As the elephants came amidst high trees, she would tear down branches and offer them to the young calves, including the calves of other elephants. If the herd was in an area with hard ground, she would use her toenails to dislodge the sun-baked soil so that the calves could eat the grass. And she would often touch the young with her tactile, knowing trunk, a quick nod of assurance and comfort for the little ones as they walked many kilometers through familiar and unfamiliar places. Once, Avijan also saw Ganga suckling her calf. The elephants would often be injured by fences and spikes in the many kilometers they walked, and they carried scarred bodies that stood as monuments to a silent, simmering war between man and elephant. Late one winter night in December 2019, the villagers near Naxalbari in North Bengal pushed off a herd of elephants from their field. Pursued and rushed, the elephants moved towards a railway line in Batashi near Panitanki. The entire herd managed to cross the line, with the exception of one young calf. There was a slope that needed to be climbed and surmounted before the railway line could be crossed. The calf desperately scrambled down the slope and then went on to the railway track. But along the railway line, another beast was coming. It was the intercity train. It pummeled right into the calf, killing it. The news of the elephant death reached citizens early in the morning. Avijan rushed to the spot. People were crowding around the calf, but about 50 meters from the calf also lay the dead mother. She may have died trying to saving her young, and tragedy had struck twice. like lightning hitting the same spot 2 times, incinerating every living thing in its wake. They didn't know which elephants had died, and Abhijan was watching as the mother's body was moved from the railway line. Where had the elephants come from? Which herd was this? When departmental staff heaved and moved the elephant, he saw a small bulge above the elephant's left ear. A sickening realization dawned. It was Ganga. She was dead. And that is how you kill an elephant twice over. If you hurt the young, you have snagged the mother too. Thank you.
Wow. That was very moving, Neha. So let me ask this question of both of you. Both of you have spent a lot of time in the wilderness. What does wilderness mean to you? How has it shaped you? And why have wilderness at all? Why not place animals in cages and people can look at them and have trees separately? Why this intimate relationship between forests and animals and wilderness?
When I started my tiger journey, one of the things I went to forests I went to early was in Nepal with a man who had been looking after the tigers there for 40 years. And I said, what does wild mean to you? And he said, wild means free in the place where it evolved. And I was on the trail for tigers, and I understood that the place where it evolved, the tiger belongs to the forest belongs to the tiger. That's what happens in the Mahabharata. You said, do not take the tiger out of the forest. The forest belongs to the tiger is the guardian of the forest. They belong together. And I think that's one of the things that a forest, above all, there are so many different ecosystems in India and across the world, but the forest is the one that I am closest to and know most about. And of course, that's one of the most important ones for India. The forest is the home of the wild animals, and we are guests in it. And that's what the wilderness means to me. It's the animals' home. And it's one of the reasons that I loved the Jungle Book when I was very young, is that it's the animals' home, and we are there as guests to learn. I was just at the Raga session just before, I don't know anybody else's, and one of the wonderful singers says, the learning never stops. And that is also true about wilderness. The learning never stops.
Lovely. Yeah.
I like places that are not arranged by people. And Wild and Wilful, the title actually comes from the idea that there could be willfulness and agency of the wild animal. And there have to be places on earth where wild animals have that agency, where Ganga can be a mother to her calf and not get killed by a railway line, or where you can have a porcupine living peacefully, or a king cobra, as Ruth spoke about, being able to leave its nest and not, get killed or poached. And as a woman as well, I feel often afraid or hesitant to be around many people that I don't know. So when I go for my field work, it's never the jungle that's frightening. It's never my field site that's frightening. It's always the long journey, meeting people. It's a hostile country for young women. So to be able to be in a place where man is not the Lord is very important for, I think, all our human spirits. But perhaps you feel it a bit more as a woman, because the thing to be afraid of in the forest is that you don't walk over a snake, or you don't disturb an elephant herd when it's drinking water. If you keep the boundary, they respect you. And I don't think people always respect boundaries. So it's an inalienable part of being a human being, to have places we can go to which we haven't made, which have made themselves and have willful and wild processes.
But also, I'd just like to add, the question behind your question, as it were, wilderness is the heart of the planet. Wilderness is how the planet was before the Anthropocene, before people got at it. And we, in a utilitarian way, we need it to survive. We need the forests to survive, for the water, for the air, and for the earth. And so those small patches of wilderness left in the earth are actually the planet going on doing its work.
Yes, I think I completely agree with that. Let's talk about your writing. So your book, Ruth, you wrote it during a difficult period of your relationship. And, your relationship and your own emotions are infused into the story of the tiger. And your book was written during the pandemic. So it was a difficult time for everybody. And I'm sure it must have been really difficult for you, who is so used to being in the wild and being outside and to be confined to the space. So did your writing help you process, your emotions and help you deal better with what is happening around you? Or was it like you had this time so you could write and that's why you wrote? Or was it because, you needed this escape into the wild, at least inside your head?
Thank you. That's a great question. I actually find writing quite difficult. It's really not cathartic for me. And in this book particularly, I didn't want to give any easy answers. I don't want the reader to feel catharsis that you've read this book and everything is fine. Now you know 5 more facts about the elephant or the cobra or the tiger. So I think my mental space during the pandemic mirrored some of the grief in this book, because it's not a depressive book, but it's definitely a book that tries to understand the complexity of the world, which obviously has its inherent grief in it. And it was written in 2020, which was the first wave, and we didn't know what COVID was. And it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because we thought the world was ending. And this is not a gloom and doom book, but it also has a lot of passages on what we're doing wrong and what we can do right. So at that time, everybody was talking about when COVID is over, we will be better. We will be better towards the earth, towards Mother Earth, and we will notice the bird outside our window. And I don't know if it's an opportunity that's gone. It was very difficult to write this book. And also I have a day job. So it's kind of like a 2 a.m. book. Like everything was written at 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. But I'm happy that it came at the time that it did, because even though we didn't have the book launches, etc., I think people today are thinking about the wild, about the thing outside the window, about our place in this world, because we are so fallible after getting COVID, after seeing our loved ones suffer a disease that wasn't even a thing a couple of years ago. And that concern, if that can be distilled into any kind of awareness or consciousness, that would be the book's job done.
So I started my tiger research after ending a long relationship, and it was very painful. So I somehow, the tiger is the great solitary. It's goes through the forest alone. I mean, in fact, mother tigers bring up tiger cubs. So quite often you will see a tiger 2 or 3 together, and that will probably be a mother with two grown-up cubs. She has to look after it. But the image of the tiger is the great solitary. And it was a wonderful gift to me, because I went through Asia. It was still the time when you got large advances. And Bal Miktapa said to me, probably nobody else will be able to do this. Go through all the tiger countries and see the traces of the tiger. And he loaded that responsibility onto me, I mean, rightly. And then he made me go back to all the forest conservators in the different countries and ask about the system of the forest management, which was really important. But for me, emotionally, I was doing these amazing journeys to Bhutan, to Sumatra, to China, where I nearly had a nervous breakdown, to Russia, and to Laos, and trying to absorb the symbolism of the tiger in each country, as well as the songs. I did poetry readings in different places. So it was a very full time. And then the writing up at the end of a trip. I remember getting on a plane after Sumatra, in Bangkok, and heaving a sigh of relief, having written up all my notes, and then thinking, nobody can get at me for 12 hours. I'm going to sit on this plane and absorb and process what I have seen and write. And so the writing for me, when it is a delight. When I write prose, it's very sort of exciting. And writing poetry is something quite different. It's much more distilled, and it might come in little bits and things like that. Would you like me to read a poem? I mean, you
Yes,
mentioned
that would
that.
be lovely.
When in Sumatra, I was in a car, a jeep, and we were going over these large sort of mountain roads, very far from anywhere, and a huge water monitor. I mean, it's about as big as this. Sort of suddenly came into the road. It was very exciting and all that. But then suddenly the car ground to a halt, and the generator or something or other had fallen out of the engine. So we had a 10-hour wait by the side of the road. And I got out of my laptop some little Chinese poems. The Chinese, in a way, were the villains of my book because of their system of Chinese medicine and the Chinese bones, the poaching, the tiger skins that is driving so much of tiger poaching. I mean, there were lots of wonderful Chinese scientists I met, but the system was the villains. But there were these beautiful little poems written on tiger paintings traditionally. And so I had written some of them down, and I made this poem out of it, sitting by the side of the road in Sumatra, waiting for the whatever it was to come along. Well, I can just say that. Water, moonlight, danger, dream, bronze urn, balance on a tree root, one slash of light, then gone. A red moon seen through clouds or almost seen. Treasure found but lost, flirting between the worlds of lost and found. An unjust law repealed. A wish come true, a lifelong sadness healed. Haven in the mind for anyone hurt by littleness. A prayer for the moment saved, treachery forgiven, flame of the crackle glazed tangle, amber reflected in grey milk jade, an old song remembered, long debt paid, a painting on silk which may fade.
I'm almost loath to say anything after this. I think we should have a moment of silence to just, absorb. This is beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And it's a difficult question to ask after such beautiful poetry. But, in terms of tangibles, are there any lessons that, you have traveled across various habitats, various ways of managing war, taking care of tigers? Are there any lessons that we can draw from other countries? Or perhaps there are some things we have done well that other countries have not been able to quite do as well. So can you tell us something about that?
Yes, I mean, in India, it's a national animal. It's a crime to do anything to it. And that's very important. And actually, you have in your book, you where is it? I'm not sure. The Twisted Strand. I don't write down. I think it was for the tiger. The people's feelings are a twisted strand of reverence and piety, and all, a lot of the feelings of religion come in here, particularly of Hinduism, but also Buddhism. But then there's also fear, and there's also, and if a tiger is going to kill your cows or going to eat the boar that eat your or going to come in following the boar that eat your corn, or if it's going to lift your baby, you don't want it near you. So there's a complicated, twisted strand there. One thing that Russia does is, when I went to what they're called Kapovedniks, the centers of forestry, there's always a room for a scientist. So, and it was a tiger scientist in Russia explained to me that it was actually the scientists who invented the system of tiger protection. In the Second World War, all the men went to the army to fight, and a lot of them were killed by the German invasion. And so the tigers came back because the men were not there with their guns killing the tigers. And so the scientists said, look, we've got to have a system of protection or the tigers will all be gone. So the science of tiger conservation is at the core of how they are protected. That doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of problems and that profit and everything gets in the way. So that's one thing, one difference. And that would be because I have been told by wonderful tiger scientists here that the foresters often regard the scientists as meddlers and people who are difficult, who are making difficulties for them. So that's one thing about science. Then there's also protection in Nepal, for instance, and also in Kaziranga in Assam. The guards who are guarding the forest against the poachers are armed. And I think that in India, where they're not armed, a lot of, I mean, up to 100 or more forest guards are killed every year by poachers, killed or maimed. So these are not things necessarily to get right or wrong, but they're the questions to ask. Are we going to arm the protection? Are we going to do what Ulus Karan suggested to me 20 years ago? What about the tribal people who naturally live in the forest, whose home it is? Could we enlist their help to get them to be the protectors of the forest in a more gentle and informed way, rather than imposing it with guns? But above all, the question is, how do the people who live alongside these wild animals, how do we help them to live there? Because those are the people who are most harmed by them. It's very interesting, actually. I talked about wild tigers in North Scotland, in a place where there were some tigers in a zoo. And a lot of people came and we talked about tigers, and I gave my talk. But within 5 minutes of the questions, we were talking about badgers, because badgers are the problem there. The badgers eat their chickens. And so it's the same problem everywhere. It's the animal that could harm you or your family that is the problem.
But yeah, that's interesting. And different countries, different problems, different animals. Neha, I have a question about, you are a wildlife conservationist in a very, very male-dominated field. I mean, women protect and build a nest and protect, do a lot of work, but very few women are allowed to make decisions about the wild or about conservation. In fact, a section of your book talks about how you went to the forest, to the forest villages, and you had really had a lot of difficulty in trying to access the women folks who live there. And when you actually spoke with one of them, she said this was the first time somebody had asked her about her opinions about tiger conservation, which I thought was very interesting. So tell us more about your experiences.
Thank you. It's not that she said it's the first time I'm asked about tigers. She said it's the first time anyone's asked me a question, asking me my opinion. So, I mean, I feel very strongly, obviously, being a woman. And so why do women not get to make decisions? So there are two things here. One is the women who live in the forest or around the forest, and conflict with wildlife impacts them in a very different way. So, for example, she's cooking something and there's an elephant in the paddy field. She goes out to see what she can do and her food gets ruined. Her kids can't go to school because they, are trying to mind their fields or drive away animals that have come there. And being a conservation biologist, I can't say in black and white that we need to conserve animals at any cost. Obviously, the human cost is too much to bear. As human beings, we can't ever advocate for something that hurts another human being. Having said that, the poor cannot pay the brunt of conservation. And in looking at the poor around protected areas or in places where there's wildlife, women are a completely different story. So we are not talking to them. We are not reaching out to them. We're not asking them what their troubles are or what their aspirations are. And in my research in Sariska Tiger Reserve, all the women actually wanted to leave that place because they wanted schools for their kids. So their answers were much more future-oriented than the men, for example, and they wanted hospitals. They wanted help in childbirth because some of them died while delivering babies inside the tiger reserve. The other aspect is being a woman and being there where you don't see other women doing anything professional. So obviously, there's a complete lack of being even visually being able to see a woman. So you don't have a woman in the forest department or in the local district administration. So whenever you go, you're viewed like some I don't know, some museum piece or something weird. Like, it's very suspicious. Like, why are you here? Like, what are you doing? Why are you're going to get tanned in the sun? Don't go there, But we need more women in making decisions for other women. So there are no sanitary pads in the forests. I mean, women live there, okay? And there is no access to neonatal, any facilities after a baby is born. So do we want to keep people like that? Do we romanticize them so much that we don't want them to have that facility? Or do we talk to them, figure it out along with what they want to figure out a conservation a way ahead? And I think conservation, it's like a patchwork blanket. There's no one solution. And there is no way that we don't listen to what the women say. And I say, you go to a community, talk to the women first. It always takes more time, but it's always much more rewarding and enriching. They are living in the future. Their issues and concerns are always to do with 5 years from now. So they're very forward thinking in that way. And in terms of having electoral representation, tribal women who are living in the forest don't have any usually. And I am very, interested in being able to highlight what they feel and bring that out in the conservation discourse, because there's no reason why conservation needs to be left just to conservationists. It must be science driven, but it must also have a social conscience and a feminine conscience at that.
Yeah. Lovely answer. And I completely agree with that. But I think we are kind of running out of time. So this is the time when audience can ask any questions that they want to. I can see hands being raised.
Good morning to the whole panel, and thank you so much for this seminar, because this was something that we usually don't think of in our daily life, and having to get this discussion in front of us was a big deal today. So my first question goes to Ma'am Ruth. So you spoke about symbolism that you tried to extract from tigers. So what was the moment when you finally extracted the kind of symbolism that you needed in your life at that time? And what's the whole experience? I would really like to have your experience shared over here.
That's a very interesting question. Thank you. I mean, it was a long journey because there were so many different countries, and I started from the position that the symbolism of the tiger is so tragic for the tiger, because it is sexy and beautiful and strong and powerful and dangerous, and everybody wants to buy in, have a slice of that symbolism, as it were. That's why the tiger magic happens. That's why the bones are poached and so on. I mean, there are people in Orissa I would meet. My brother lived, would have a tiger's claw around their neck and all that stuff. But as I went on, in Bhutan, the tiger is one of the defenders of Buddhism in Bhutan, the lowliest. It goes along the ground, and then you go up to the thunder dragon and so on. And eventually, for me, towards the end of my time, I was back in Badra Forest, where I'd been before, with a friend who knows the forest very well, called Girish. And we saw a leopard. We didn't see a tiger that day, and it was a beautiful forest, and it was getting dark. We were in a little jeep, and these beautiful reddish trunks. And then just in front of us, we saw this probably female leopard crouching, and then she crossed the road. And I thought, okay, that's enough for me. I go into the forest, I go into the world hoping to see a tiger, but I find a leopard. And that's so you go into your own journey, and you are given a flash of insight, and that's yours to keep. So I suppose that for me is the end of it, that I felt that the tiger and the whole world of the Indian forest was a gift to me from what had happened to me, from my journey.
Thank you so much for sharing that, ma'am. And my next question is to Neha, ma'am. So, ma'am, you mentioned in the beginning of when you started to speak, you mentioned that people are the first thing that scare you while you're in a forest, and animals are rather much more pacified creatures for you. So if we think about it through an animal's perspective, I just had this thought because last year I visited Ranthambore Wildlife Sanctuary. I'm not into this field as much as you are into it, but there was a scene that I saw. So it was basically a deer who was ready to get some water through the river, and there was an alligator waiting to hunt it. So could animals also think like this, that humans are much more pacified creatures for them, while the other animals are more of a threat to them? So what do you have to say about it? I just had this thought in my mind.
So the crocodile you saw is a magarmach, a magar crocodile. It's an obligate carnivore, meaning it can only eat meat. It can't drink milk. It can't eat like McDonald's. It can't eat the stuff that we like. So this is a part of nature to understand what a thing does. A crocodile is a top predator, and a deer is a prey animal. So a deer is going to browse on leaves, and that's all that it eats, plants and vegetable matter. And a crocodile is going to eat meat. We are the only ones who eat everything, but animals usually have specific dietary choices. So, for example, a venomous snake like a cobra or a king cobra or a Russell's viper, do we hate it because it has venom, or should we accept it for what it was meant to do, which is to kill its prey with its venom so that it can live and also raise its young? So the king cobra is the only snake we know of that actually builds a nest for its eggs. It will make a nest. The mother will sit on the nest and keep the eggs warm. And she's going to eat other snakes. So she doesn't, she's not vegetarian. So I think understanding nature is also understanding, having an acceptance of the various kinds of things that are there in the world. And I don't think a crocodile is evil. I don't think a venomous snake should not exist. I think they should. They are not evil. That's just what they're supposed to do. And if you respect them, I have walked into cobras many times in the forest and I've never been bitten. That's why I'm here. I'm not dead. So if you respect their boundaries, they respect you. I've always had that experience. And I've also walked into tigers and rhinos, wild buffaloes, leopards on foot. I was on foot because I was walking a transect doing a survey. And it was all right. I kept my distance and they kept theirs.
I'd like to add a little bit to that, which is that it's very distressing for us to see an animal killing another animal. I mean, the worst that happened that I saw was in Kenya. And we watched an old lioness bring down a zebra. She was very close. It had been a long chase. I think she was an old lion. She was by herself, which is unusual. And it happened, the zebra was as close to me as you are. And we were in the Jeep. And what they don't let you hear on the wildlife films are the cries. The crying of that zebra as it gradually died was awful. Then we sat very still. The lioness was exhausted. She was panting like that. Then we heard the most awful noise, a sort of chittering noise all around us. And it was the hyenas. We had seen a den of hyenas with cubs and everything before. And they were going to destroy the lioness. And she looked up and around like this. And, her eyes were going like this. And there was a dead zebra. And then she tried to make a break for it. And they ganged up against her. But our Jeep guy, the driver, drove. He thought that we wanted to go closer. There was nothing I wanted less than to see another animal killed before my eyes. But because he moved and because the lion was more used to Jeeps than the hyenas were, they fell back a bit and the lion streaked away. And then we were right close to the zebra. And for 40 minutes, those hyenas went into it and they start eating the stomach first. And the smell was awful. Shreds of flesh came up in the air and were flung on us. So all that aspect of nature is distressing to us, but it is how that world works. And the human beings are, as we say, are different, and we are guests in it. And we should not try and stop it happening.
I just need to add that you must have seen The Lion King, in which the hyenas are the bad guys, but they're not. That's just a Disney film. The hyenas are scavengers and they have to eat other animals. It's all right.
It's all right for the hyenas to eat. They need to eat too. Do we have any more? Oh, we have a few more questions. There's a lady here.
Good morning, good afternoon, actually. I want to ask something. We always talk about development, right? Development is, as you said, the women want schools, they want hospitals, but there is that dialogue which is always very difficult. What does development mean? If I look back in my own life, the nature cures which my grandmother knew and my mother knows, I don't know because I take a pill whenever I feel sick. Somewhere along the line, we lose all that. In your own research, I mean, you've done so much going into the other side of the story. I'd really like to understand, where do you think the answer lies, or how do we approach the answer? I'm sure there's no answer to it yet.
I think development must take many people along. So if you're building a big dam that drowns a forest, for example, it doesn't take many people along. I think for me, the simplest definition is taking as many people along as possible. So if you're making a bullet train, who does it displace and who does it, benefit? So we must do that kind of cost benefit analysis in terms of understanding who it benefits and who makes the money. At the same time, nature gives us ecosystem services, and we are kind of running out of time. So we can't endlessly keep restoring the places that we've destroyed, because there's such few places left now. I would say we need to do environment impact assessments of every project, every large project, but also do social impact assessments that look at whether people get displaced, because they say in India that someone must pay the price for development. This is a very common phrase that policymakers often use. Who is that someone? Do those someone also have a voice? And over here, there's an entire legal movement worldwide looking at the personhood of rivers, forests, mother trees that are disproportionately important to the ecosystem around them. And that's a very interesting conversation, because there are certain features in the topography which are invaluable. And that needs to go into the environment impact assessment. And finally, I want to say, whoever's taking the decisions, it cannot be a monolith. So it can't just be a Niti Aayog, which has never gone to a forest or never tasted the waters of a Himalayan stream, or never, felt the trunk of a tree, right? And the millions of years it takes for it to be in that place at that time. So.
I also, Gandhi said, there is enough in the world for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. And the war in Ukraine at the moment, and for Europeans, it is a question of how much do we rely on Russia's gas and oil, and should we be relying on it anyway? Bringing up this terrible war is bringing up the whole question of energy. What is the cost of our dependence on fossil fuels is a huge question. And you're absolutely right. I mean, development is the most loaded word in the language, and perhaps development is not always going forward.